Is there anywhere on earth perfect freedom, sorrow's dearth, selfless friendship, blameless birth, cherished needs, naught else has worth? Is there anywhere on earth perfect freedom, sorrow's dearth, selfless friendship, blameless birth, cherished needs, naught else has worth?
Devi and I have been asked to speak a little bit about the wisdom of Swami Kriyananda, and especially some of the lessons we learned in the very early years of Ananda. So, I met Swamiji in 1966 and then became his student in 1967. So that's a while ago. It's over 45 years now, and I've been with him and been able to be part of the experience of Ananda, and the experience, been able to receive so much from him over those years. He's been more than a teacher. He's been a spiritual father. He's been a friend. He's been obviously a teacher and a spiritual guide. But he didn't only give lectures. He didn't only give the teachings or the philosophy. Most of all, what he gave was love and friendship. And through that medium, he created a magnetism that affected the lives of thousands and thousands of people, and most especially those of us who were able to be with him, had the great blessing to be with him on a daily basis in this life. I would say that to a certain extent his life took different phases according to what was needed. His whole life was given to trying to do what his guru had begun to do and what his guru told him to do. His guru, Yoganandaji, when he was with him, told him that your dharma in this life is writing, lecturing, and editing. And Swamiji carried on that work in a magnificent manner. He also felt, because Yogananda in his last years often talked, in fact almost every lecture that he gave, Yogananda, no matter what the subject was, he would introduce the subject also of communities. He called them World Brotherhood communities. And he said that these communities where devotees can live together, he said job, church, and home in one place, and we should live simply but keep our minds elevated. So simple living and high thinking. He said that they lead to the greatest happiness. So it was very interesting the way that he put it. It wasn't just theoretically we should do this, but he, like a doctor, gave the prescription and then gave, so that we could understand the reason why we should take that prescription. So in this case, he said that devotees who love God should gather together, just as we're doing tonight, gathering together, because in our search for God, and I'll talk about this a little later, there's a law of magnetism that is very, very important. In fact, I'll touch on it now. Yoganandaji taught that the whole world works according to magnetism. Everything, our brains, our nervous system, our chakras, our whole body, he said everything obeys the law of magnetism. And when you introduce an energy flow into a wire, automatically around that wire is created a field of magnetism. When we think, our thought, according to how strong it is, how powerful it is, creates a field of magnetism around it. Master taught that even the chakras, the first chakra and the second chakra, the Muladhara and the Swadhisthana, the Muladhara is the south pole of a magnet, the Swadhisthana is the north pole, negative and positive pole. Then between the Swadhisthana and the Manipur chakra, there's again magnetism. So then the Swadhisthana takes on the negative pole, and the Manipur chakra is the positive pole. And there's magnetism through our bodies. There's magnetism with the left hand and the right hand. The most important polarity of all is the base of the spine, where the energy which has descended is accumulated in the Kundalini, and then either the spiritual eye or the thousand-petaled lotus. That forms a negative and positive pole, and our body is like a battery. But in this particular instance, what Master said, and Swamiji taught us, this was one of the major things that he taught us in the early years, is that according to our thoughts and actions, we create a magnetic field around ourselves. And when we're with a lot of people who have different kinds of magnetism, it all cancels itself out, because the different goals, the different ways of living of everyone mixing together, it all is canceled out. Swamiji and Master used the illustration of, why is a bar of steel just a bar of steel when it could be a magnet? And he said that because in a bar of steel, all of the molecules are going in different directions. Each molecule has a positive and a negative polarity, and they're all random. And so millions, billions of molecules in a bar of steel, they all cancel each other out. But if you take that bar of steel and you put it next to a magnet, the power of that magnet realigns those molecules, so then the second piece of steel that was unmagnetized becomes magnetized. Or you can take and you can pass electricity through that bar of magnet, and that too aligns all of those molecules. And so they line up in a north-south direction, and being all aligned like that, the whole bar of steel becomes magnetic. And so it is with a group of people. That's what Yogananda was trying to do. He said that the world cancels everything out. But if we gather together with other people who have the same kind of polarity, in other words, one of their primary goals, or their primary goal, is to seek God, is to try to live their life in such a way that they attune their own individual will with the will of God. When we gather together that way, then we all begin to help each other in that. And Master said that environment is stronger than willpower. Now this is especially true for devotees who are newer on the path, that because we're used to being influenced by the environment around us, when we first try to meditate, or we first try to turn our minds more and more toward God, perhaps we try to practice some of the yamas, such as non-violence and non-lying, non-stealing, some of those yamas of Patanjali, because the world around us doesn't support that, and our own magnetism hasn't become powerful enough yet, then we are subject, the environment around us pulls our magnetism away even from our own desires, our own higher thoughts, and our own... I don't know if any of you have started meditating and then had difficulty continuing on a daily basis. It's very common. that people have that difficulty. And part of that is it would be very, very much easier if we lived in an environment where everybody meditated together. And then everyone supports each other in the positive habits. So one of the things that Swamiji was doing in the early years was he was magnetizing all of us. And remember I said you can either have a powerful magnet and put the bar of steel near it, or you can have a powerful flow of energy through that magnet, that bar of steel. Well, Swami was putting a powerful flow of energy through us. He worked so hard when he was beginning the work of Ananda. I came to him in San Francisco even before Ananda was started, and I worked with him for about 1.5 years as his assistant. And so I got to see very close what kind of energy he put out. I would go to meditate at 6 in the morning. At that time, I still had a job. I wasn't yet hadn't yet quit my job and become his assistant. So I would go at 6 in the morning and I would meditate. And there were just a few of us, 3 or 4 others that would do that. And so Swamiji was up at 6 in the morning, beginning his meditations. Later on, I found that he would then start working. He would be writing books. He would be answering correspondence. He would be setting up lectures and doing everything, such as we are all banding together to help do for this weekend. Swamiji was doing that all on his own for quite a long time. And then he would give the lecture, and then he would talk to people after the lecture. And in many cases, he would have then a long commute home. And he would get home at midnight and start the next morning at 6 in the morning again. And day after day after day, that same schedule went on. And he was going around a large area, San Francisco, and to the north of San Francisco, south. The west of San Francisco he didn't go because that's ocean, and all he could teach out there were fish. So he didn't go that direction, but he came to the east, to Sacramento, and he was giving these classes. Yogananda used a wonderful phrase. He said, during the Depression in America in the 1930s, he said, if I didn't have a job, I would churn the ether until it gave me a job. And so Swamiji was churning the ether at that time. And when I began to work with him, this was in 1968, I could see what kind of an energy output, but it wasn't just the hours that he put in, because many people work long hours, but it was the intensity of his consciousness during those times. I took his classes several times, and he was certainly, for those of us who were drawn, he was the most powerful teacher, powerful lecturer you could imagine. He spoke about 8 or 9 languages, for one thing, and that's not that important, except that it shows how powerful his mind was. So he knew many languages. He had a very good education. When he would lecture, he would talk about philosophy, he would talk about history, ancient history, modern history, he would talk about the writers, he would talk about art. He just had this wide range, and when you listened to him talk, he just drew you in to those lectures because it was fascinating. But there again, just entertainment or showing that he has a lot of knowledge, that wouldn't have changed lives. What changed lives, changed the lives of all of us, is that he had absolute, unquestioning dedication to his guru, unquestioning dedication to Master. And he always felt that Master was flowing through him, and that ultimately only Divine Mother exists. And that Divine Mother takes the form of spiritual teachers, in this case takes the form of Guru. And that Guru flows through us and does everything. But we don't hold that even though it's true, we aren't able to hold on to the knowledge of that, the consciousness of that. And so one of the great delusions is that I am doing all of this. I am doing the work. I am having to work. Well, Swamiji, one of the reasons that he had such power was he realized that it was Divine Mother and Master who was doing the work through him. And many, many times, not so much early on, because we weren't yet ready to understand these truths, but later on, he very often said that, I feel that I haven't done anything. God has done it all through me. And he was, in that sense, very humble. He did so many things. Remember I said that Master told him, when I say Master, I think you all know that I'm referring to Yoganandaji. Master told him that his dharma in this life was writing, lecturing, and editing. And he wrote more than 150 books. Many of you have read some of them. They aren't just little books. They aren't just something that doesn't have meaning. These are some of the most powerful, the best explanations of Vedantic thinking, Vedantic truths that have been written in our lifetime. And he wrote 150 of those books. Devi and I have each written a few books. We know how much energy it takes to write a book. Well, Swamiji, as he got more and more used to writing books, he would sometimes write a book in a week or 2 weeks. And not just write any old book that seems like it doesn't have much to it. Many of you have seen, perhaps read and own, the essence of the Bhagavad-Gita that he wrote. He wrote that in 2 months. Daviji and I were with him. We came to Gurgaon, and he had wanted for many, many, many years to put into a book Yoganandaji's teachings, his explanation of the Bhagavad-Gita. And that book is so deep, it's going to change lives. In fact, Master, when he finished writing that, said, this book is, a new scripture has been born. This book will reach millions of people. Millions, I tell you. I have seen it. It is registered in the ether. And so Master knew that the power of that book. And Swamiji, because Master had told him to write and told him to edit, he wanted to do that work for Master. But he didn't know how he could do it because he couldn't get a hold of Master's original manuscripts. But when he started writing, Devi and I arrived from the U.S. and we were staying with him in Gurgaon during that time. And it was a little bit bittersweet because Swamiji said to us, well, he didn't say it quite this bluntly, but what he said was, I have written the first chapter before you arrived because I knew once you arrived you would disturb me and I couldn't get as much work done because I'd have to pay attention to you. We had a deep, and it was like he was like our father. And so it was like us coming to visit our father, and the father was busy, and him saying, well, I've started this work because I knew once you were here I was going to have to spend time entertaining you and paying attention. But every day for 2 months, he would go sometimes at 3 in the morning, sometimes at 4 in the morning, and he would write at least 10 pages a day, so that over the period of 2 months, he wrote 600 pages. And what happened was, as he would start writing the explanation of each of the slokas or each of the sayings of Krishna or Arjuna, he would remember in detail Master's teachings on that. And he was so in tune with Master that he said at that period in his life, and then later on, he said, I don't even know anymore where Yogananda ends and Kriyananda begins. They've melted together. It's like if you have two ice cubes, you can keep them apart and you can see where one ends and where the other begins. But when the temperature gets raised and those ice cubes melt, where does one ice cube stop and the other begin? It's all merged together. And so it was with Swamiji and Master. Later on in his life, he earlier prayed that he wanted Master to guide every thought that he thought. And then later he said, I realized that isn't enough. I want Master not only to guide every thought, to guide every feeling, to guide every action, to guide everything in my life. I don't want to do anything that isn't guided by Master. And that's what I mean. As the consciousness becomes more elevated, the ice cubes melt and they just merge together. And it's hard to say which is which. In the early years then, Swamiji was putting out tremendous willpower, because it takes a lot of willpower, a lot of energy to start something. You all will find that to be true for the work here in Chennai, that it's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of energy in order to make this work solid. And that was what Swami was training all of us to do for the beginning of the work that was going to spread around the world. And so he was working hard. He never said, I expect you to work hard, but he had such energy and magnetism that we all wanted to work hard. And of course we were young and energetic and happy, and so it was easy for us. We worked hard, but we weren't all that focused, I must admit. Sometimes we would drift off and do different projects and not do them very effectively. But nonetheless, we were becoming magnetized by Swamiji. Another thing that he did at that time, remember, Master told him to write. So always I don't think I ever knew him, even from the time, thank you. Even from the time that I first met him, where he wasn't writing a book or writing lessons or doing some manner of writing, but he was then also lecturing. And in the early years of Ananda, he would give a lecture. We had a special week where it was most clear. This week was called Spiritual Renewal Week. And we still have that. The tradition still continues 45 or 46 years later. But now we have many teachers, and we have choirs, and we have musicians, and we have lots of people who participate in producing that week. In the first few years, Swami did it all. So at 6 in the morning, we would hear Swami coming. He had a mridanga, and he would be playing a rhythm on the mridanga and chanting, and he would walk around to the tents where we were all sleeping, and he would wake us up. And then we would go together and we would meditate, and he would lead the meditation and he would lead the chanting. And then he didn't cook the meals. That he let us do. But
he taught us how to cook.
But he did. Yes, he taught us how to cook Indian food. And in fact, he taught a lot of the ladies how to cook many things that he had learned either in India or from Master or picked up. And then we would gather together, and he would give a talk for about 2 hours on different aspects of the teachings, usually on Raja Yoga and aspects that you have learned in meditation 1, 2, 3, and 4 in that kind of sequence. But because he had more time, he would give that in more depth. Then in the afternoon, he would give interviews to people. In the evening, he would do some sort of entertainment. We didn't have choirs in those days, but he had begun to write some songs, and he had a guitar. So we would gather together, sometimes around a little campfire, and he would play his guitar and sing. And he did that day after day. And so he was doing everything, but he was magnetizing all of us. All that energy, all that will was magnetizing us, because he was giving us a model of what kind of energy it takes to create something. He was also telling us, in fact, it doesn't take any energy, any effort to create something. What it really takes is the effort to get ourselves out of the way, because it's Guru and Divine Mother who's creating everything. But it does take some effort for us to get over the delusion that we're doing it. So it takes some effort. We think we're doing it, and because of that, it seems hard. But he was showing us how to do that. So he was teaching us, he was magnetizing us. And in those early years, as I said, there were different phases in his life. I would say those years, it was primarily about willpower and wisdom. He was writing the early lessons that we still use in order to teach these teachings. He was writing different aspects from Master. So Master said that there are 8 different qualities of God, but he particularly expressed 3 of them. And what he most clearly expressed, this is Master talking about himself, was wisdom, love, and joy. And the same was true for Swamiji. And so through his writing, through his lecturing, through the example that he gave us, he was expressing, at that stage, I would say, primarily willpower and wisdom. And then gradually, later on, he began to, because the work was well established, he began to resonate more with his innate love and heart quality. And later on, it was more about friendship and kindness and deep caring for each individual. And I can't tell you the number of times that Swamiji, sometimes there would be someone who lived in a city, and we were driving somewhere, and the city was quite a ways out of the way. It would take maybe 2 hours to drive there and 2 hours to come back when we were on a trip. And Swamiji was saying, oh, let's go see that person, because he knew that they were a little isolated and longing for someone to come and lift their spirits. I heard a beautiful story about Anandamoyi Ma. There was a man who later became a deep disciple of hers. But at this time, he was just beginning to have an association. And Ma would always travel. And this disciple thought, why is she so restless? She can't seem ever to sit still, ever to be in one place. She has to go from one place to another. I know that she's a great soul, but why is she so restless? And so at one point, he was traveling with her, and they were staying at a house that was near a lake. And Ma said, let's go. They had traveled to stay at this house near the lake. And Ma said, let's go and have a picnic today. And so they packed up some food and they went to the lake, and they sat down and they began to unpack the food. And Ma got up and said, we have to leave. They hadn't even unpacked the food. She said, we have to leave. And this man thought, she can't even sit still long enough to eat lunch. What is wrong with her? And this little criticism in his mind. And the others said, "Oh, Ma, we just have gotten here. Let's have our lunch and then we can go back." She said, "No, I must leave now." And she got up and started to leave, and of course they quickly packed up and chased after her. And then she walked quite rapidly, and then she stopped under a big tree. And just a few moments after she stopped, a bird fell out of the branches and fell at her feet. And there was a boy with her. She said, "Please pick it up and hold it up to me." And so he did so. And the bird looked deeply into Ma's eyes for about a minute, and she looked back into the eyes of this little bird, and then it fluttered its wings and it died. And she said, "The reason we came to this place and stayed in this house was I felt the call of the soul of this bird wanting to have darshan before it died. And that's why we've come here. And now that is fulfilled, we can go on." And so they went back to the house, and then they traveled on. But this disciple learned that the great ones never do anything except that it's in tune with the will of God, and they're seeing and hearing and feeling things that are not clear or not present for the rest of us. They live in a world of subtle thought and subtle energy that they can pick up on. And so Swamiji was like that with people. He was constantly thinking of people. One time someone asked him, because he was the head of, by then, of quite a big organization, and so someone asked him, "What is the main responsibility of you as the spiritual director?" And Swamiji gave a beautiful answer. He said, "My main responsibility is to look out for each individual." He didn't say organization and vision and I've got to do this work and that. He said, "My main job is to look out for each individual who has come to this work." And he showed that again and again and again to us. So these are some of the qualities. I'll just end by saying that one time this was in 1984, so it was about 30 years ago. Davy and I, along with Swami at the very beginning, but we helped start the work in Italy and Europe. And we were there in the fall, and then Swamiji had to leave. And then it was a very, very difficult winter. We had almost no money. We were living in a guest house that was not well heated, and it was just a difficult winter. And so we had to endure that. And also for us, we had a young son, and it wasn't a good place for him to be, so he went back to and stayed with some of our friends in Ananda. So we were lonely and missing our son, and anyway, it was a difficult period of a few months. And in the spring, Swamiji came, and he knew what we had been through. And he said, "No great work is ever started without tapasya. And it takes people willing to do some tapasya in order to overcome the energy of inertia and in order for a work to start." And so Swamiji did so much tapasya on behalf of all of us. He did it physically on his body. He had many, many physical, medical problems throughout his life, but he never paid any attention to those things very much. They were like a little annoyance. For you and me, it would be the major tale of our whole life. I had an open heart surgery and they had to replace a valve, and I couldn't do anything for months and months after that while I healed, and it'd be our main topic of conversation. Swamiji, the day after his open heart surgery, he was editing a book. and he hardly ever talked about it. So anyway, he did a lot of tapasya, but that didn't affect him very much. Mainly what he was doing, and his whole life revolved around this one central fact. He was simply trying to be an instrument for his guru, for Yoganandaji, to bring the light, the wisdom, the joy, the love that Yoganandaji incarnated in order to bring into the world. And Swamiji's whole life was dedicated to helping that happen.